All right, it is 5:30 and I will call the January 23rd meeting of the Community Wellness Committee to order. So, Councilmember Murphy. Here. Councilmember Wakari Shu.
Hello.
And I am here as well. So we do not have minutes from December 5th to approve because we seem to have a technological snafu. So we will have those that are at our February meeting. So I figured we would just jump into the review of the year, and Katie was thinking about it. You were questioning me about, what's on the agenda. I thought, well, you're new here. We should probably spend some time, reviewing what we've done this year, kind of helping you understand a little scope of what we've done, and kind of where we've been, and then, we can talk a little bit about where we want to go, and certainly that's B on the agenda is where we're trying to go, and then certainly there's other things that have come up that I think will be helpful. So. Again, I think it would be good, and all three of you, please feel free to jump in any time and kind of add to it, since you've all been part of all these meetings as well. So, as you probably know, the mayor created this committee and populated it in January a year ago, and tasked us with, not too difficult of a task, right, is addressing some of the kind of homeless, drug addiction, mental health issues, and we've come to see that those are linked in many cases. We were also COVID was part of that, but I think that has become less of a focus as things have kind of gotten a little bit more normalized. We added food insecurity as one of the things that we felt we needed to address as well. So clearly those are all three really big issues, and we've got a lot of different organizations in this community and in the extended community that are already addressing these, and I think we're wrestling with the same types of issues that big cities or cities across America, big and small, are trying to address as well. So, kind of trying to wade into this murky, what do we do? We begin to see that our role might be one of a body that could organize folks, try to create conversations and dialogues around these particular issues. Not that we have the resources or the people power to address all of these issues. Maybe our role can be to facilitate conversation. We also felt pretty importantly that we needed to be a little bit more aware of the situation. I can speak for myself, and Councilmember Murphy can speak for himself, but I was aware of these issues, but not at the depth or not the level or not the local level here that others were. So to that end, we heard a lot from our chiefs. Chief Witzenberg was really instrumental in giving us a lot of background information, as was Chief Knapp. Dr. Georgeson was also very helpful in giving us perspective from a healthcare professional perspective. She connected us with some different folks, and then we invited them to our meetings, and we had great conversations with healthcare professionals and other professionals to try to understand the scope of the situation. I guess I'll characterize the situation like this: is yes, we have a problem that is reflected. It's a problem that we have in many small communities and large communities. Is that we definitely have a lot of individuals that struggle with being unhomed, struggle with drug addiction, struggle with mental health, sometimes struggle with all three. We do have a bunch of folks in our community that are food insecure. We have a lot of really great organizations doing a lot of great work, but are struggling under the weight of all this, and many of these are nonprofit organizations that are trying to do the best they can. So kind of out of these conversations for the first half of the year, the committee decided that it would be helpful to try to get all the players in this particular arena into the room. And I believe that you were there at the Community Wellness Summit we had in mid-August, I think it was. And so out of that came, some great discussions, and I can certainly share the notes with you. But we recognize, yes, we've got some problems. Some of the kind of problems that we as council members are very well aware of kept coming to the surface, housing being one of those. We recognize there's a lot of problems with housing. We recognize that many of our partners within the nonprofit field just don't have the resources and money to be able to address some of these problems the way they'd like to, but are doing great work and really, trying to do the best they can. However, and this kind of leads us to B, but I'll kind of explain it, but then I'll step back and let anybody else fill in things I may have missed. One of the things that came out of that meeting that we felt was kind of missing, was a big hole, and we've heard it from that meeting, we've heard it from several of our experts here, including Dr. Knight, who is I forget his exact title at Bassett, he's like the CEO or something at that level, very high level at Bassett. We begin to recognize that, and certainly Chief Weisenberg has made us very aware of this as well, that the support for children, especially in the area of kind of mental health or counseling, there's not a lot of support in this area, and there's a really big need. So we've been working on planning another conversation rather than trying to go big and have a summit, trying to have a conversation amongst some of the folks that we've identified that work in this particular area, not just mental health, but kind of children's services in general, to try to begin a conversation. So that's kind of where we are. I kind of brought you up to speed on a year. I don't know, Councilmember Murphy, if you want to, add anything. Mayor, if you'd like to add anything. Chief, feel free as well. But just kind of up to speed where we are at.
Yeah, I think you've done a very thorough job. It was really helpful, especially when we had Dr. Jorgensen speak, not necessarily as a guest speaker, but when she was here. As someone who's been in Oneonta about 10 years, I didn't know necessarily what was here before, and the absolute, or not absolute, but the lack of mental health services, especially for children, and how we used to have a mental health wing at AOL Fox, but things have changed. It was really helpful to get kind of a context as to why is this kind of happening, and kind of on some of the local parameters in which it is happening.
Yeah, and I think Chief Weisenberg said something at one point in time that really kind of sat with me. It's been gnawing at me the whole time, and I'm going to paraphrase, so my apologies, but it was something along the lines of, if we can kind of address these issues early when they're children, if we can create, the optimal environment to be able to support them, to be able to get them any services that they need and help that they need, we might do a better job at kind of maybe reducing the number of problems later on in adulthood. And that kind of sat with me in terms of, certainly as an educator, sits with me as well, is like, let's try to focus on this particular group. There's a lot of others, but if we can do something to address this group, that there's a big hole, this would be quite helpful in moving us forward. So, Mayor, Chief, did you want to add anything?
So I would just add, I talk about this committee quite a bit to people. It's on a lot of people's minds. The issues around mental health and around homelessness and poverty, and all of those various those various issues that inform sort of the dynamic of downtown these days, playing out on our streets. So a lot of people have been spending time with me in conversation around that. I reference this committee a bit, and one of the things that I tell them, one of the things that I feel like is one of the smartest things that this group could have done is what you did, which is gather together all of these various service agencies, these various providers, and begin to identify where the gaps were in services. There were areas of services that we saw that were overlaps, but more to my interest is the identification of the gaps. And as you now, again, kudos to you. This is this huge task I've presented you with, and you can't possibly do anything but focus on something, and you are, and I think that you're focused on the most appropriate thing. Thank you very much, Chief, for your kind of direction on this, which is focusing on young families and young members of our community who are at risk. So as we start to look at that as being the identified target for this group's, providing some level of proposal or action that might, in some fashion, help mitigate some of their issues. The question that I've got is, in the larger context of the summit that you had, there were any number of different gaps that were identified. Have you begun to drill down to the gaps that are most specific to this now more narrow focus of the committee, which is the younger population? And if so, is that something where we go next to try to identify how to fill those gaps?
I'll respond if you want to respond.
Feel free.
Sure.
Chewing on it.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I think that this did become a real focal point of the conversation during the summit.
Right.
It became one of those things where we recognize we have a gap and we have a hole, but and you might recall, we were fixated, and perhaps rightfully so, on some larger issues gaps that we recognize, and housing being one of those ones that we kept coming back to a lot. And I think it was just given the nature of, the folks that were in that room, is that was one of the prevailing issues. So I think in hindsight, I would have liked to have drilled into that a little bit more at that particular time. I think that's the purpose of this next meeting, is to try to assemble the organizations that, to some extent, focus on mental health or just the wellness, let's just say that broadly, of young people in our area. And I'm hoping that in that particular meeting, and we're going to, again, scale it back and look at it being a Zoom meeting, that we will get a better sense on what those gaps are there. And then, I keep coming back to, and I think you and I had this conversation around the time of summit, is what next? And we need to have, I'm hoping that we have some level of commitment from the participants to say, let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep coming back to this, to these points, and how do we work together collectively to address some of those gaps and holes? How might we be able to utilize our resources, to address them? And so I'm going to hope that we can maybe kind of leave that meeting with a real clear understanding of the gaps, and then a real clear kind of commitment to the actions that we're going to take in the future. And I recognize that we're asking some of the busiest people in our community to take on more responsibility, but if simply we are communicating more across different organizations and trying to work collectively, and maybe trying to meet regularly. And Chief, I think you kind of pointed to your board as being a good opportunity for people who are coming together and having really important and vital conversations. Maybe we can do that as well. So I guess that's my response. But hindsight, I think I would have liked to drill in that a little bit more. But I think given where we were trying to really try to understand the framework for what we were working on and what was some of the important things. And I think we identified also some really clear gaps in those other areas. I just think, I guess, for example, housing, we have a housing committee that's addressing that. So that doesn't need to be on our particular radar. This seems to be one of those pieces that's kind of falling through the cracks. And I think that this might be a good one to focus on.
Yeah, so that's honestly, having been involved in this, I think every meeting, maybe but for one, I absolutely follow the trajectory of this committee. And in the beginning, you couldn't possibly know what your focus was going to wind up being. My sense of it is, though, even in that larger summit, there were, and I'm not privy to the data on it, or have the time to look at it for that matter. But there may already have been, just within the context of that summit, some identifiable gaps that kind of are connective to the more focused mission of this committee. And then, having that in hand, and then with what I think is, the exact right course to take, bringing the players in through Zoom, I guess is what the next meeting is going to be, to, with an agenda that helps more clarify through discussion what those gaps are more specific to the younger demographic that you're focusing on. I'm really anxious in starting to generate some solutions to some of the problems, even as we may not know how we fund them or how they are, manned or presented. That nonetheless we can identify that there are some solutions that we can kind of agree on. If we can get here, then we're going to have made a difference, and then we can start to figure out how to get there.
And I agree with you, I think, identifying solutions, but I also feel like not all these solutions we are going to be able to enact.
Right.
I think we can play a role in advocating for the solutions we've identified. Luke made mention of the AO Fox kind of wing for mental health. I mean, we've heard now that that might be considered. I think that would be great. Any opportunity we have to advocate for that and support that, I think would be helpful. So, we might not be able to solve all these, but we should certainly be in the process of kind of pushing and trying to.
And as a three-member committee, realistically speaking, if you're able to engage people who, are actually, that's their day's work,
Right.
and, with the support of the city, and that might just be, Mark, here's a letter that needs to get written in advocacy of this thing or that thing, that all of that moved us, on the right path.
Yeah, as kind of on that same page as a letter, I really think this next meeting is so much more focused than our previous one. If we can come away with, again, not a perhaps letter outline or anything like that, but if we're all on the same page about what needs to be done, if we can focus our efforts, if we can focus on advocating, that number of voices is important, especially when you're advocating to our representatives in Albany. And if we can all come to an understanding, be on the same page, perhaps I don't know the word I'm looking for, but kind of a unified stand on what we want to do, what action we want to take, a unified voice with several committees, both government and nonprofit, showing that we support this and our community needs this. I think would be pretty powerful.
By getting people into the room, even if it's virtually, even if it's just Zoom, we're talking about things that may be actions, but you don't know until you really start to have the conversation, because, the experience of all of these other individuals is going to wind up, in so many cases, providing a new opportunity to be able to push this forward. So, probably, that's all I'm gonna do here. I tend to take over meetings, so sorry.
No, as you already said, you've been in this from the start, so I think your perspective has been helpful. You've been like, no offense, but another committee member here, so. What I'll do also, Katie, is send over the notes from the meeting to you. If I can kind of walk and chew them at the same time, we'll do that during the meeting here, but if not, I'll do it shortly after. Did you have any questions about kind of that kind of brief history?
No, I really appreciate that. I think when I heard about children's mental health being sort of I feel like I'm mischaracterizing that now with my words, but being the topic of this group and sort of the avenue that we're going in terms of addressing community wellness as a whole, I can see the merit in that. I think that it struck me as kind of like a long-term solution, and I think we do have an acute problem as well. But I think that, walking me through that, I think that long-term solution comes up a little bit quicker than maybe I would give it credit for, so, if we can get kids off on the right foot, that's really great. I mean, especially if we want to be a community that cares about our families and our kids, taking a holistic approach to that is great, so I'm excited to learn more. I think my initial thoughts, I think you raised a really good point about what we can do as a committee, as a council, as a city. It's not just a matter of funding, it's a matter of, what is an appropriate role for us in some of these things. So I think that's the work, is figuring out what those actions are that move the ball forward. I'm interested to hear more, once the meeting is scheduled, and to be in the room, and I'm really, I think, at least for this meeting, just sort of here to listen, so, yeah.
Well, and I also just want to clarify is that while I think we found a hole that we feel is pretty important, I don't want to say that we're limited only to addressing that.
Okay.
I think that there are still other issues that are equally important. Clearly, we have so much time in the day. This is not a full-time job for us. We're not used to this full-time job, but I think there might become other issues that we feel are important. Again, we had identified food scarcity as one of those particular issues, and while I do feel like it's really crucial, we've not been able to dedicate any time to that at all. So, while I think we're moving right now in the direction of trying to address this and trying to create the conversation, that's not to say that we're limited only in this particular action or this direction, so.
Cool.
And I did just send you over the notes from everything, so you can take a look at that.
Oh, yes. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, a lot of it is, I don't know, perhaps being there makes it a little bit easier to understand it, just trying to capture,
Probably.
both Emily and I were trying to capture notes and they weren't always perfect, so. Chief, I did give you an opportunity if you wanted to add any of that at all.
Well, I mean, you know, as a law enforcement agency, we're spending time dealing, an enormous amount of time dealing with people that have found themselves homeless as well as, you know, offenders, criminal offenders, and a lot of the people that we deal with have combined mental health and drug issues and are victims of childhood trauma and, you know, problems from their youth that they can't shake. I think that really has become glaringly apparent to me over a 25-year career. And how is it that we'll be able to navigate out of that and start working on generational issues, whether it's generational poverty or, and I think really the only way to do that is by addressing it at the early phases. So, you know, looking at children that don't know they're in a crisis situation, that think that they just have a, they've got a certain lot in life, and being encouraged and supported that they have a future is really important. And I think that's really something that if we as a society as a whole can start to really wrap our head around and figure out some really, see what works. You know, some of it doesn't involve a lot of cost, especially if you're talking about, you know, programs where you might have mentors or other volunteers in the community that can do outreach to at-risk kids and provide them some sort of a model outside of what they may be used to. That may not be, it's not something that I have time to deal with because I'm dealing with the opposite end of it, but you know, if we can rally people that would be interested in creating that environment, which there are people, I mean, the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club, it's just a matter of finding out, you know, what I think they need to be supported and populate their programs.
And yeah, and populating their programs is really the challenge. Is a lot of kids, and I know in talking with folks in both of those institutions, so many people through the pandemic, so many families during the pandemic became so digitally connected that it's really, I was just out at Huntington Park taking videos of kids sliding down the hill, you know, first real good snow on our hill at Huntington Park. It was so nice to see kids out playing. But what, half a dozen. So many kids are still, you know, their first instinct is to sit down at their tablet or their whatever, and it's very difficult to get them to be engaged so that they can be mentored and assisted. So that's a challenge.
It's a different age, certainly.
Well, I think you raise a really good point, and my initial thought is that you started to go there as well, is that wellness is not just how we identify and support social services for kids, but really like, you know, we define wellness as support and connection and security. Like there are other ways, you know, that we can foster that, to your point, without money, or, you know, if we make it our mindset, you know, we can begin to create an environment where it's easier for people to seek those kind of connections. That I think connection really is the big one, because if you feel, you know, isolated, that's where things start to fester a little bit. So yeah, I'm interested in kind of expounding a little bit more on that.
Yeah, well, so with that in mind then, unless there's any other points, I think let's, and the chief actually kind of asked a question there about what we would kind of ask some of our partners in this community, but I'd like to move towards the discussion about this, this meeting that we're gonna have his child service organizations. So I will self-confess also, we had talked about a February 6th or 12th, or 13th date, and then I got behind on things and missed sending out the letter to everybody. So I think I'd like to push it maybe towards February 13th, maybe the week after, to be able to try to, approach some of our folks and see what's available to them. I think we also had left that people were gonna send me a list of participants, so if, I'll add that to our homework, if there are participants that you think should be part of that, if you can send me, I have some names, but I don't have the name and contact information for everyone, so if there are folks that you believe should be there, that'd be great. What I will do is just kind of assemble the whole group and then send out an email, kind of invitation to everybody, kind of telling a little bit about what the purpose is and an invitation. But I didn't have much of a starting point for doing that, so if you all can send that to me, that would be helpful.
Can you send a list of the proposed attendees, even as you may not have their contact information?
Yeah.
Might be able to help with that, and then that would also allow me to see who may more likely be on the list that isn't.
Sure, I'll send out to everybody. I don't have that written down. I'll have to type it up tonight and get it out to everybody, but I'll do that. Great. So then, what I thought was that we could take this time to begin to kind of plan out, what we're gonna ask, how we're gonna position this, kind of the same way we did the summit, was to have a bit of a plan, that we could then direct and kind of coordinate moving forward. And I think having this conversation will be good, because whenever I kind of, will finish off this invitation letter, to maybe kind of capture some of what we are asking. I think Chief Witzenberg just put a question out there, which seems to be the foundational question is, what do they need so that we can support them and some of the programs that they have ongoing. I think maybe even understanding the list of the programs, and what are the different programs, to understand that, and then what do they need. Other questions or other things we want to get at?
Wasn't there, Dr. Georgeson had mentioned that she had been in contact with a woman from Bassett who was completing a survey or study of, I think it involved to some degree,
Yeah.
youth issues in
Yep.
the county.
Yeah, and did we ever get that? I don't think we saw the results of that, did we?
I didn't get anything.
Yeah. Let me check in with her, because that might be a good thing to send it out to people, if that's something that they don't mind sharing, to be able to take a look at that. Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that.
I'm wondering if it might be useful to know what they've had a lot of success with in the past, this kind of ties into what they need, but getting an idea of what's worked in the past might be helpful. So we don't necessarily retrace their steps, or we can maybe focus on areas that have not necessarily proven to work, but maybe have proven to work, areas that for whatever reason kind of were going well, maybe they dropped off the radar in 2020 when COVID hit. Might be worth some time and energy.
Good, thank you. Thank you both. Anything else?
I would think that maybe part of the conversation would be the obstacles that people may be finding relative to just being able to put together the opportunities for kids and young families that they'd like to. Are they dealing with funding issues? Are they dealing with infrastructure issues? There may be some things that well, not the city, there may be other resources that might be able to be brought in that otherwise aren't through the system.
Thank you.
I don't know if this is something maybe that could be done off the committee time as well. Maybe things that, and I have to wordsmith this a little bit, but things that are really impacting that aren't so obvious, that aren't discussed And again, I'm thinking on it right now, but things that maybe aren't so obvious that's going on, that is, because we have such a huge problem here, that maybe some of the supports that are leading to that problem, are overlooked, or, maybe just the resources, just don't have the resources to address them.
And I guess maybe too, kind of a magic wand thing, if you could have whatever partnership that you want to have, who would it be with?
I mean, a natural partnership for me that I think is worth exploring is how can we work with the YMCA more, because they do our summer programming, and that's an organization that already cares about kids' wellness, and how can we support them? I mean, they've been a really great partner to run that program, to come here and tell us what challenges they're facing. I think just strengthening that partnership could really go a long way. Especially if someone was gonna run something like a mentorship program, either the Y or the Boys Club, presumably, would be the place for that to happen. So,
Well, let's not forget the teen center as well.
yeah.
And even what Fordue's doing, even though it's an older demographic, they've got the Club Odyssey, I think starts at 18, but.
Well, they're related, right? The
Yes.
teen center and Club Odyssey.
Yes, they both Fordue.
Oh, Fordue is now teen center?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't aware of that. I was in the original board that created it and then tried to marry it with the YMCA, but that wasn't real successful. Good, thank you for that, added that there. Any other thoughts or any directions? So what I'll do then is, put together these questions and probably select a couple of them that I'll add into the letter that we'll send out to people to say, these are the types of things we'd like you to think about. I think certainly your existing programs would be an easy one for them to talk about, kind of give a sense of what we're trying to do and where we're hoping to go with this. And we'll send that out then. I think that'd be helpful. We had talked also about Mondays and Wednesdays being the best time. Does that still seem like, this was all kind of going over the same path here, Katie, because of course you weren't on the committee at that particular time.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still, are those good days for you, or what,
For
we're
this-
talking late afternoon, kind of a 4 o'clock type of meeting, or 3:30, something like that, that would be able to meet with people
Oh, for the,
for this
yeah,
conversation?
and so you're thinking the third week of February, like the week of the 13th?
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever you schedule it, I'll make it work.
Are you thinking that you're looking like at 90 minutes or so, approximately?
I think so. I mean, I think the count that we had, rough count, we thought we'd maybe have between 8 and 10 or 12 organizations that would be there. I think an hour and a half would be about it, maybe 2, but I would say we can kind of keep it.
So if you hit 3:30, then you're likely to take them right up to what might typically be the end of their day.
Okay.
I mean, the whole thing's about attendance.
Yeah.
That we want to make sure that people.
Right, we're being respectful of their day.
Exactly.
This is silly, but the fact that it's Valentine's Day the next day, I'm not a big Valentine guy, but would that impact anybody? I'll
No.
tell my wife that.
Are you looking at the 13th then?
We were gonna try to give them a couple options and see what would work best for people, but that was just what we discussed initially. Well, we discussed the 6th also, but I think we've,
On the 14th, there's a caring for the homeless commission meeting. That's their institutional date for a Zoom, and that's likely to be several of the same partners.
On the 14th?
That's on Valentine's Day
Okay.
at
Okay.
3 p.m. So I would probably
so maybe we need to move it out of that the TV, there were
That's
Yeah.
yeah.
2 meetings kind of back to back, so
Monday the 20th?
the 20th, that's President's Day, is that?
Do people have, this is gonna be a silly question, people have off for President's Day?
Yeah.
Didn't say.
Yeah, I think
So,
for some folks it is, for sure.
All right, so what about Wednesday, the 22nd, and maybe Monday, the 27th, as 2 dates to give people?
I can absolutely be the 27th, I can't the 22nd, but, the 27th I can be there.
I'm the opposite.
Actually, hold on, what time are we thinking of doing it?
Again, 3:30?
I have class at 4:40, but I can be there from 3 to 4:30.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to do this to you again, but this Regional Innovation Council meeting, that probably has a number of those, you included, at 2 o'clock, from 2 to 4, on the 22nd.
I should probably check my work calendar while I'm out here. All right, well, that won't work for me either.
The next day, the 23rd, is Thursday. Is that an option?
I'm okay, I mean, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm wide open.
Yeah, actually Tuesday and Thursday would be better for me than Monday, Wednesday, but I can, like I said, I can make it work.
If we're doing Zoom, I can be there right up until class doesn't start till 4:30.
So we're looking at 23rd potentially.
Okay, so the 23rd of February is one potential, do we wanna just try to see if we can push everyone into that date and just roll
Sure.
it that way? Since that works for at least the 4 of us here?
Yeah.
We're saying
Excellent.
3 or 3:30, what time was the start?
3:30?
3:30?
3:30, okay.
And that, you know, you were able to promise them an hour and a half and thereabouts.
Yep, yep. Okay. All right, so I'll finish that up tonight and send it out to you all for comment, the draft, and then once we approve that, I'll send you the list as well, and people can get me contact information, we can go from there.
Yep.
Good, any other, else? I mean, I think that's really all we really need to find for that one. I think we've got some questions, we know, you know, we'll identify the participants, I think we should be good going into that.
No worries for refreshments.
Right, there we go. Thank you, Mayor, for picking up the last time. But we will have to then, Kara, I'll have to send you get a Zoom link from you for all that. So, good, I'll just ask people to respond, and then I can send out the Zoom link to those people that respond. All right, I think we're good. So the next thing was, I kind of added this late when we received, you know, a letter from a citizen, you know, was concerned about, amongst other things, but certainly park use, and I figured, Katie, it might be interesting to hear, you know, your Parks and Rec group had talked about some of the usage of Newa Park. I just wanted to kind of understand a little more what the scope of that problem and see kind of what the discussions were, so just trying to recognize that someone had a valid concern and at least try to give that some airtime.
Yeah, okay, I mean, I didn't prepare to talk about that, but I will go, you know, based on my recollection. of the
Yep, no, that's it,
conversations
it's
that I
just,
had.
yeah, didn't have to, not to get
Okay.
too exact, but kind of what the conversation was and.
Yeah, basically that, you know, obviously we've seen an uptick in the community of unsheltered people. A lot of times they're finding shelter in the park, pavilions, you know, our wooded areas. You know, people who, other users of the parks who are walking through, have expressed varying levels of comfort with that, based on the interactions that they've had with some of these folks. Yeah, I mean, it's disheartening too, as much as it's uncomfortable, you know, to see that, you know, there wasn't a better solution for this person in this moment than, you know, squatting up against a tree and trying to save work. So, yeah, the conversation, you know, sort of largely centered around what should park users do in a scenario where, you know, they maybe feel unsafe or they feel concerned for someone that they see in an area. This isn't necessarily in the park system, but it's on the trail system. One of the places that I hear about a lot is the New Island area. Chief, that you had mentioned that the drone might be helpful with recognizing when there are folks who are camping out there. But I think as we invest in our parks and invest in our trail system, wanting people to be comfortable there, but also to, find a way to better support the people who feel like that's their best option.
So I'm gonna jump in real quick. So the chief and I, in fact, maybe we can reconnect on this, later on this week, talk about getting together. Chief and I are looking at, a way to, empower people with information on how to appropriately act, when connecting with somebody with whom they are not comfortable, or know how to act. And so we're gonna strategize that and hopefully have something, concrete to talk about. There's also a thing, we've had a relatively mild winter, obviously, outside of, we've got 7 inches of snow right now, but there's been a relatively mild winter, and one of the things that we've come to understand is that the warming station has not been used at a level that we would have expected. People are coming in there for food. They're not coming in there for shelter, which makes you think that they are comfortable being someplace else. And that said, it does appear, and the chief would know more about this than anybody in this room, that they are finding themselves encamped in one place or another throughout the city. And maybe, Chief, this is something that you could talk more about.
It's hard to say. We have people that make complaints about activity on properties, commercial properties that are occupied during the day, and people setting up in smaller confined spaces for the overnights. It's a really hard thing for me to really hone in on. They're mobile. We're really talking about a nomadic existence in a lot of cases, people that don't stay in one place for very long. So it's hard for us to enumerate how many people we're talking about. Several of them have been brought to my attention anecdotally as living inside of a van or camper outside of the city limits. I have asked that my officers try to get some sort of enumeration there. It's difficult. Without actually leaving the city and trying to take an enumeration of people that might be living in a van outside of the city. I mean, where does that end? So, it's hard to say. And some of them may be domiciled and just looking for a way to get food in a way that doesn't cost them money so that they can spend money elsewhere.
So I think one of the things that bring this up a lot right now is that anecdotally, people are feeling like there are more unsheltered people in the city, maybe than ever before.
That could very well be. I mean, if we look at the impacts of COVID and the fact that landlords weren't able to evict people for non-payment, and then evictions open back up again, now they could have flooded the market with people that really can't find housing for because they've got a judgment or a lien against them for past due rent and nobody to get a reference from, because who's going to give a reference to somebody that just cost them, $30,000?
Sure.
It's complicated, and I don't know what the answer is, and I don't have access. I mean, I can Google like everybody else, what the compounding problems are for increase in homeless populations. But I think it's, the answer is yes.
Right.
COVID had an impact on everybody, including their mental health, their ability to connect with other people, their ability to pay their rents, their credit scores because of an inability to pay rent. So it's a hugely complicated issue. And then there's just people that say they want to be homeless, that don't want to be part of a system where they're required to stay in one place and that there's rules there. And we see that frequently with some of the places that we have that are supposed to be, they're government paid for housing, temporary housing, but some people stay there for very, very long periods of time, with very little oversight. I think a lot of that has to do with, staffing, and it's easier to allocate money to people kind of en masse, than it is to hold people accountable and police that same population. So it's a really complicated issue.
Do we have I know you said this is a very nomadic population. Is there a rough estimate of about approximately how many folks there are within the city that would be considered without housing?
I mean, I've heard some numbers, but I don't know that that's the case. I mean, I've heard that there's 25 legitimately undomiciled people, but what do they consider undomiciled? Is it people that they have put up in the local homeless shelter or at the hotel? People that haven't been enumerated, like the ones that are in a van, or or somebody that's living out of their car. I just don't know if there's a good way to find that. Now I know that OFO is doing their point in time enumeration for homeless people, which we've agreed to assist them with, and I think that's on the 26th.
They're looking at a year out before they have hard numbers, because I guess it has to go back through HUD, I believe, before they can release numbers that are,
So this will be next February.
ready for prime time. But they will give us at least, a rough estimate of those numbers several months before it goes through the bureaucratic process in the federal government. So hopefully in the next 6 to 8 months, we'll have a better handle on the numbers. But I don't know what that does for us. I mean,
It's a good question.
There's value in knowing a number, but beyond, that, I don't know what it does for us.
Well, I think this is where, I started to mention the fact that, it seems like we're putting ourselves in a good direction in terms of supporting the youth for our community, but the acute problem right now is, to your point, why doesn't really matter. It's like, what do we do? And, I think, I don't have the answer. It sounded like I was about to have the answer, but, I think meeting at the summit, having all those folks in a room and hearing what services were all available, it was really helpful. But I think you raise a really good point, which is that sometimes, in my experience, my personal experience, there are folks who don't trust those services for any number of reasons. A big issue, I think, is that people have pets for companionship when they're in those situations that then they don't want to give up in order to go into assisted housing.
That would have to be among the drastic minority, because we just don't deal with people that are toting around pets that are being reported as homeless.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, 99%, I would think we had one person over a year ago that was really reluctant because she had a cat with her, and nobody would take the cat. But
Okay.
I think to a large degree, around here anyway, we haven't really seen any of the homeless people that we've had direct contact with that are in possession of an animal.
Okay.
So really, I'm having a lot of unique, small conversations with small groups or individuals, and the good news is there's a consensus among most everybody that I've talked to, whether it's DSS, Catholic Charities, state senator, college presidents, whatever it may be. There's a consensus that there are a couple of things that need to happen, and one of them is that there needs to be another option besides the options that we currently employ for dealing with our unsheltered, and so that's one piece. Another piece is there needs to be some addition of substance to the substantial addition to the quote-unquote wraparound services that are being offered to folks that are in that position. Those two things are among many that we seem to be in consensus on. So we know what the goals are. We don't get there, but it starts, I think, with people understanding that there are a couple of things that we need to do. We need to provide better service, oversight, as the chief referenced, and we need to find a different option besides, you know, Chestnut Street and Main Street and you know, what have you. Because that only puts them in a place where they are within feet of the very things that have put them at risk in a lot of cases.
You're absolutely right, and I think that that's something that's kind of like the white elephant in the room. Whereas I think somebody had mentioned like a housing that included a clearinghouse for services. What we found happening is exactly the opposite, is we've got housing now that's a clearinghouse for things that we don't want people to be exposed to, and that they're absolutely exposed to those at their whim. So because there is no oversight, there is no monitoring of who's coming or going, that's the problem, is that they've become kind of a magnet for other issues.
And we become a destination.
To some degree.
It's not the marketing we're looking for.
Well, I appreciate, Mayor, that you're kind of taking this up, and it seems like the kind of conversation that you both will be having about, you know, how you let people know would be good. It just felt like, given the letter that we received that was obviously brought here to our meeting, council meeting a few weeks ago, that we probably needed to discuss a little bit more. And Katie, sorry to put you on the spot, but I appreciate hearing about that discussion there. This is a tough issue. It really is, and it's playing out in real time. We can talk theoretically all we want, but you know, it's here in real time, and the challenges for our community, and certainly challenges for your, you know, officers and for everyone else's. You know, what's the best way to approach this, and how do we?
It's difficult for us because while we want to help, you know, the homeless population, when I'm asked the question of what are you going to do about the homeless problem, if I had the answer to that, I'd be a national hero.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a perspective issue and a level of lack of perspective on what the scope of the issue is and how it has to be approached. That's a missing piece from the general public. You know, the last thing I want to do is see people that are homeless and at risk of you know, committing crimes out of desperation or whatever else. So having that security, whether it be housing security, food security, is really important on our end. It's one of the reasons why we work so closely with a lot of the social service providers. And we've had very good luck. Over the last year, we've seen some of the problems that we had on Main Street with real frequent flyers dry up because we've been able to locate family members and see them off to other places, or work with other law enforcement agencies that may have not necessarily flown the flag that they were looking for this person, but being able to provide them the support that they need to close a case here and there. But there's still really troubled folks that we deal with that refuse to get any treatment whatsoever, refuse to help themselves on any level, and they really become kind of the crux of our issue.
I guess I have a couple of direct questions. One is, I know, Mayor, that you had mentioned activating Muller Plaza.
Yes.
Can you just expound on that a little bit? I theoretically would love to see some
Sure.
vendors in that plaza.
Yeah, yeah. So, before I answer that, though, I want to just really quickly, for this committee to understand that I fully respect the charge that I've given you guys and the work that you're doing. The conversations that I'm having are currently very much in the beginning stages of something that will hopefully wind up providing something that looks like a plan. As soon as I have something that has any value to you, I'll be bringing this to you to loop you in fully, because this is the Community Wellness Committee. So that you're clear on that,
Well, just to be really clear, Mayor, you don't need to apologize for that.
No,
I appreciate
no.
the work that you're doing on
Yeah,
this.
great,
Yeah, no, I do want you to understand,
Right.
where I see this group. That said, Muller Plaza is a piece of this. And it sounds counterintuitive because I made my bones kind of on the idea of let's throw an event, let's close a street, let's let's close Main Street specifically, and I am very much advocating for almost no closures of Main Street. It only helps some businesses, hurts some businesses, and what we need to have is muscle memory for people that doesn't require promotion. Come to downtown because there's always something going on, no matter what day of the week. Looking at the Ithaca Commons or some of the other kind of precedents for that in other communities. We have an inset off of Main Street. The police department, God knows, the chief and I have talked about this, if we could have a patrolman up and down the street, I would be thrilled. It's not, we don't have the manpower, and but the chief and I, we agree, we understand. This is what we have. What we need, though, is for a line of sight, the ability to be able to determine, on a quick, not a quick, but a slow, let's say, drive through Oneonta, downtown, more specifically, where our issues are, where we may need to be a mitigating force. Muller Plaza is inset and is out of the line of view. Makes it, unless a policeman is, an officer is on the street and can wander around Muller Plaza, you don't necessarily know who's in the corners there. And it makes Muller Plaza a difficult kind of a venue to be comfortable in, because people find themselves who are not our best in the corner pockets of Muller Plaza, in essentially in the shadows. And what we need to do, my sense of both for marketing our city as a place to come to any day, any time of day, there's always something going on in Muller Plaza, but also there's nothing like activity to dissuade people from using a park like that for other purposes, and we need to make it a more positive environment. So I am looking at having a constant stream of maybe vendors, maybe somebody playing guitar, maybe somebody doing just little things going on all the time. We'll probably talk through the appropriate committees about some issues around our permits, because we typically have a permit issue, always have a permit issue in Muller Plaza. Maybe it's something that for Muller Plaza we need to consider rescinding, but I want to have activity there all the time. From 10 o'clock in the morning until 5 or 6 o'clock at night, there's always something going on in Muller Plaza. A safe place to go to, a place where you know there's energy, engagement, a place that will attract you to downtown, doesn't need to be promoted, because whenever you show up, there's going to be something going on, even if it's just a couple of vendors, and it'll wind up making that safer space, and something that the police are not going to have to be as concerned about. We are fishing out of the bushes, I'm sure, on every morning basis. DPW might be paraphernalia. We need to become a different environment, and we can do that. It's a very small, contained space, and doesn't require a lot to be energized. So that's really kind of one of the ways that we make downtown more attractive to the general population, and less attractive to folks that find themselves only feet away, who are using that as a safe space. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Did you have a follow-up?
No, I was saying, it's your question.
Oh, yeah.
You've been around me long enough to know I never remember it. It's like a
That's great.
5-second retention on things like that.
No, that's great, and I think it's a good opportunity. The reason why vendors sprung to mind is because we had that hot dog vendor who was there for a long time.
Yeah, it was a good idea. That was problematic.
Yeah, he kind of sprawled, and a solution that was brought to me at that time was, if there were defined spaces that could be rented for like very cheap by local vendors, like, Essentials by DK, Essential Oils, or whatever, and on any given day when they felt like they had some time and wanted to throw down and vend something, speaking as someone with a small small business in our community, I think that that would be really cool. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the entire thing, but I'm interested to see about activating that. I don't know if, so one of the things that the Ithaca Commons has that we don't have is, walkability, right? It's closed, it's kinda cool. I've regularly been told that that's not something that we can do on Main Street, which I haven't, sussed out for myself. I wonder if there's a way, of course, cause no one has told me directly from DOT, no, you can't do that. But I think that's one thing, that differentiates that, but I like the idea of that as an inspiration, and I'll be interested to see if that's something that we can really man, cause I think that could be tricky, like, right, with the Meet Me on Main Street, after a while, it became a little bit trickier to get people down there, so.
Absolutely right.
So-
And of course, one of the things about Main Street, when you close a Main Street and you don't have our Main Street, you have a desert from Ford all the way basically to this end of Muller Plaza, where there really are no restaurants and no
Right.
shops.
Well, that leads me to my next point, which is something that had been floated to me, which is gonna sound completely cuckoo, but someone had mentioned, and I know that we're dealing with a space issue in the public safety building, about trying to get, at least like a substation of OPD on Main Street, like in one of the empty storefronts.
This takes me back, gosh, 20 years, something like that.
Sure.
I tried
Good idea
so
for that.
desperately to put it only on the OPD substation in the walkway in the parking
Yeah.
garage. That was, it was,
I think that's the,
That- I
that's
tried
the
really
spot
hard.
that they tried to pitch me on.
yeah, but,
So I don't know, I know that we're looking at the space utilization of that building, maybe just having police presence down there. I know you can't, the thing is, I know you don't have the patrol staff to have someone on Main Street all the time. I don't know if there's a feasible way, cause we have to talk about like your fleet, theoretically being able to dispatch quickly, but,
The biggest contributing factor there is just my minimum shift coverage,
right.
which we're just
Oh,
barely,
in terms of having a
we just don't,
substation.
we only have, 2 officers, most days working. And the days where things have become very complicated,
yeah, right, and
and that's a
it's
whole other conversation.
totally, yeah, that's a big thing that, money and all kinds of contributing factors, but, the other thing that I wanted to ask about is, supportive housing, right? We have had the pitch for more supportive housing in our area, do we think that that's something, is there a way, cause I think what I'm hearing from you, Chief, is that the oversight sometimes in those facilities is lacking. So is there a way for us to, do we need it, or do we need better oversight in the supportive housing that we have? If we get it, is there any way for us to have, not oversight over the facility itself, but over like the type of facility that it is and the criteria